My wife posted, "He's losing everything," with champagne in hand, celebrating our divorce before it even started. Her book club friends cheered. Her trainer boyfriend smiled. Her lawyer promised her millions. What none of them knew was that I'd been moving chess pieces for 2 years while they played checkers. By the time Dolly realized the game had changed, the board was already mine. My name is Mervyn Harmon. I'm 61 years old, and I've been married to Dolores for 32 years. We live in Medford, Oregon, where I spent most of my career as a Forest Service consultant before transitioning into private land management. Dolly, she's always been the social butterfly, PDA president, book club organizer, the kind of woman who knows everybody's business and isn't shy about sharing her opinions. The day everything changed started like any other Tuesday. I was sitting in my home office, reviewing some timber assessment reports, when my phone buzzed with a Facebook notification. Quincy, our 24-year-old son, had tagged me in a comment. That's when I saw it. The photo showed Dolly holding a champagne flute, wearing those oversized sunglasses she'd bought during our last vacation to Cabo. She was grinning like she just won the lottery. The caption read, "Finally free. Divorce papers filed today. He's the one losing everything, not me. Time to start living. Hashtag new beginnings, hashtag freedom." 43 likes already. 11 laughing face reactions. Comments rolling in from her book club friends. "You go girl," and "about time," and "he never deserved you anyway." I set my phone down slowly, like it might explode if I moved too fast. The taste in my mouth turned metallic, bitter. Not surprise exactly. More like confirmation of something I'd suspected, but hoped I was wrong about. See, I've been hearing things. Catching fragments of conversations when she thought I was asleep. Noticing how she'd started dressing differently, speaking differently, like she was auditioning for a role in someone else's life. What Dolly didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this moment longer than she'd been planning it. While she was busy documenting her journey for social media, I've been having quiet conversations with Vernon Thatcher, an old Army buddy who'd traded his uniform for a law degree. While she was picking out champagne flutes for her celebration photos, I've been restructuring assets and establishing trusts. You see, Dolly always underestimated me. Saw me as the quiet guy who fixed things around the house and paid the bills on time. What she never understood was that the same methodical approach that made me good at forest management also made me pretty decent at strategic planning. And brother, had I been planning. I picked up my phone and called Vernon. He answered on the second ring. "Merv, I saw it," Vernon said without preamble. "She really went public with it." "Huh. Like a fireworks show on the 4th of July, I replied. "Think she's ready for what comes next?" Vernon chuckled, a dry sound that held no humor. "I don't think she has the first clue what comes next. It all started 18 months ago on a rainy Thursday night in November. I'd fallen asleep in my recliner while watching the Blazers game, my back acting up something fierce after spending the day surveying a timber plot near Crater Lake. The house was quiet except for the rain drumming against the windows and the occasional pop from the fireplace. That's when I heard Dolly's voice drifting from the kitchen, low and conspiratorial. "Trust me, Wanda, he has no idea what's coming," Dolly was saying into her phone. I could hear the smile in her voice, that particular tone she used when she thought she was being clever. "He's so predictable, so comfortable. Still thinks we're just going through some rough patch." I stayed perfectly still, years of hunting instincts kicking in. "Don't move, don't breathe, just listen. The fitness trainer I told you about, Brock," Dolly continued. "He thinks I should wait until after our anniversary next year. Something about maximizing my settlement potential after 33 years of marriage." My blood turned to ice water. Wanda Pratt was Dolly's younger sister, a woman who'd been through 3 divorces and had opinions about men that could strip paint. If Dolly was talking strategy with Wanda, this wasn't some midlife crisis. This was a calculated campaign. "Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing," Dolly laughed. "Let him keep thinking he's the smart one with his little consulting business and his precious timber investments. He doesn't know I've been documenting everything. Every account, every property, every asset he thinks he's hiding." The conversation went on for another 10 minutes. Details about Brock, this trainer at her new gym who apparently had strong opinions about women, knowing their worth. Plans about how to time the divorce filing for maximum impact. Casual mentions of liquidating assets and securing her fair share. When she finally hung up, I waited another 20 minutes before pretending to wake up naturally. Stretched, yawned, made all the right noises. "Hey there, sleepyhead," Dolly said, walking into the living room with a cup of tea. "Good game." "Not bad," I replied, studying her face. She looked exactly the same as always. Same smile, same eyes, same woman I'd shared a bed with for over 3 decades. "How was book club?" "Oh, you know how it is. Bunch of women talking too much about books they barely read." She kissed my forehead like she had 1,000 times before. "I'm heading up to bed. Don't stay up too late." I sat there in that recliner until nearly 2 in the morning, rain still pattering against the glass. That night, I started keeping a journal. Not the kind where you write about feelings and dreams, but the practical kind. Dates, times, conversations, observations. The next morning, I called Vernon Thatcher. We'd served together in the Rangers back in '82, and I knew he'd gone into estate law after his discharge. More importantly, I knew he was the kind of man who understood that sometimes preparation is the difference between victory and disaster. "Vernon," I said when he picked up, "I need to ask you a hypothetical question about asset protection." "Hypothetical, huh?" Vernon replied. "Funny thing about hypothetical questions, Merv. They have a way of becoming very real very quickly." Vernon's office sat in a converted Victorian house on Main Street, the kind of place that whispered old money and quiet power. No flashy signs, no advertising, just a brass nameplate that read Thatcher and Associates, Estate Planning. The waiting room smelled like leather and confidence. "Coffee?" Vernon asked, gesturing to an antique sideboard that held a silver service set. Even after all these years, he still carried himself like a ranger, straight spine, alert eyes, movements that wasted no energy. "Black," I replied, settling into a chair that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. Vernon poured 2 cups and handed me one. "So Merv, tell me about this hypothetical situation." I laid it out for him. Every detail from that night, every conversation I'd overheard since, every subtle change in Dolly's behavior. Vernon listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. "Timeline?" he asked when I finished. She mentioned waiting until after our anniversary. "That's 8 months away." Vernon nodded slowly. "Good. Time is our friend here. What assets are we talking about?" I pulled out a folder I prepared. "The house is worth about $450. Cabin on the Mackenzie River, maybe $280. My consulting business, hard to value, but it's been bringing in steady 6 figures. Retirement accounts, about $800,000 combined. Then, there's the timberland up near Mount Hood." "How much timberland?" Vernon's eyebrows rose slightly. 47 acres. My grandfather bought it for peanuts in 1943. Current timber value alone is pushing $500,000, but the development potential. I shrugged. Sky's the limit. Vernon set down his coffee cup. "Merv, what I'm about to suggest is completely legal, but it requires absolute precision and patience. Are you prepared for that?" "I've been patient for 32 years. I can manage 8 more months." Over the next 2 hours, Vernon outlined a strategy that was both elegant and ruthless. We'd establish an irrevocable trust, funded through my consulting business. The timberland would be donated to a conservation LLC, with me as a non-compensated advisor. The cabin would be gifted to Quincy through a qualified personal residence trust. "What about my overseas accounts?" I asked. Vernon's pen stopped moving. "Overseas accounts. For my contracting work in Kuwait back in '03. Kept some funds in Swiss banks for emergencies. Nothing illegal, all properly reported to the IRS." "How much are we talking about?" "About 200,000. Dolly doesn't know about it." Vernon smiled for the first time that day. She's about to find out that there's a lot she doesn't know. As I walked back to my truck, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: control. Dolly thought she was playing chess while I was stuck playing checkers. She had no idea I'd been studying the board for decades. The next 8 months passed like a masterclass in strategic patience. While Dolly planned her grand exit, I systematically dismantled everything she thought she knew about her financial life. Every Tuesday, I met Vernon for lunch at a diner outside town. To anyone watching, we were just 2 old army buddies shooting the breeze over coffee and pie. In reality, we were orchestrating the most comprehensive asset protection strategy I'd ever seen. The timberland went first. We established the Pacific Northwest Conservation Trust, with myself listed as an unpaid environmental consultant. The 47 acres were donated for their ecological value, complete with a professional environmental impact study that cost me 15 grand, but established the land's conservation importance. Beautiful work, Vernon said, reviewing the paperwork. Even if she contests it, the state environmental board will fight to keep it protected. The cabin followed 2 weeks later. Quincy initially balked when I explained what we were doing. Dad, I don't want to be part of some scheme, Quincy said over dinner at his apartment in Eugene. Son, this isn't a scheme, I replied. This is me protecting what 3 generations of Harmon men built from someone who views it as liquidation material. I showed him the documents. The Qualified Personal Residence Trust was structured so that I retained use of the cabin for 15 years, but legal ownership transferred to him immediately. What if Mom fights this? Quincy asked. She can try. But the trust was established 18 months before any discussion of divorce. Vernon made sure of that. My consulting business required more finesse. We restructured it as Cascade Resource Management LLC, with myself as managing partner and Vernon's firm as the legal entity holding the operating agreements. Technically, I became an employee of my own company. The Swiss accounts were the easiest part. I'd established those during my overseas contracting days, all properly documented with the Treasury Department. What Dolly didn't know was that I'd been steadily moving consulting fees into cryptocurrency portfolios managed through those same Swiss institutions. Bitcoin's volatile, Vernon warned during one of our Tuesday meetings. So is divorce court, I replied. At least with crypto, I control the keys. By the time Dolly filed those papers, what she thought was $1 million marital estate had shrunk to roughly what we'd have in our checking accounts in her car. Everything else existed in a legal structure that made Fort Knox look like a piggy bank. The beautiful part wasn't just the asset protection. It was the documentation. Every transfer, every trust establishment, every corporate restructuring had been filed months before she'd even mentioned the word divorce. Vernon had made sure that even the most aggressive attorney would find our preparations legally bulletproof. 3 days before our anniversary, I got a text from Quincy. Dad, she's been asking questions about the cabin. Wants to know if I receive any gifts from you recently. I texted back. Tell her the truth. You're the legal owner of a conservation cabin with a 15-year use restriction. Sometimes the truth is the most devastating weapon of all. The Riverside Cafe was one of those places where Medford's social elite gathered to see and be seen. Overpriced salads, pretentious wine lists, and enough gossip to fuel a small town's drama for months. It was exactly where I expected to find Dolly, celebrating her perceived victory. I didn't plan to be there. I'd driven into town to pick up supplies from the hardware store when I spotted her silver Lexus in the parking lot. Something made me park across the street and walk into the coffee shop next door, where the windows offered a perfect view of the cafe's outdoor seating area. There she was, holding court at a table with 4 other women from her book club. Lacey Winters, whose husband owned the largest auto dealership in town. Janet Collins, the mayor's wife. Rebecca Stone, whose family had been in timber since the Oregon Territory days. And leading the conversation, my soon-to-be ex-wife, wearing a coral blazer I'd never seen before and gesturing with a champagne flute like she was conducting an orchestra. I ordered a black coffee and took a seat by the window, pulling out my phone to look busy while I listened through the partially open glass. The lawyer says I should expect at least 60% of everything, Dolly was saying, her voice carrying that satisfied tone she used when she thought she'd outsmarted someone. Maybe 70, considering the length of our marriage and his income history. Lacey leaned forward eagerly. What about the cabin? That place must be worth a fortune. Oh, that's mine too. Community property, you know, along with the timberland and his precious consulting business. Rebecca raised her glass. Here's to finally getting what you deserve, honey. They all toasted to that, laughing like schoolgirls sharing secrets. The irony was so thick I could have cut it with a butter knife. Dolly thought she was celebrating her victory before the battle had even begun. And Brock? Janet asked with a sly smile. How's that situation developing? Dolly's grin widened. Let's just say I'm discovering what I've been missing all these years. A real man who appreciates what he has. Good for you, Lacey said. Mervyn never did seem like he had much fire in him. That stung more than I expected it to. 32 years of marriage. And this was how she talked about me, to her friends. Like I was some kind of furniture that had outlived its usefulness. I finished my coffee and walked back to my truck. On the drive home, I called Vernon. They're really confident, I told him. Talking about 60 to 70% splits. Vernon chuckled. Confidence is a beautiful thing, Merv. Right up until reality sets in. When do we let them see reality? Soon, Vernon replied. Very soon. 3 days after Dolly's divorce filing hit the local courthouse records, her phone rang while she was organizing her closet. She'd been going through her wardrobe, separating clothes into 3 piles. Keep for a new life, donate, and burn because they reminded her of being married to me. I know this because Quincy told me later. He'd stopped by to check on her, still playing the dutiful son, even though he knew what was coming. Franklin Accounting, she answered, putting the call on speaker while she continued folding clothes. This is Dolly. Mrs. Harmon. This is Patricia Franklin. I need to discuss some concerns about your financial disclosure paperwork. Dolly barely looked up from a sweater she was examining. What kind of concerns? Well, several of the accounts you listed. We can't access them. That got her attention. What do you mean, can't access them? The timberland, for instance. According to county records, it was transferred to a conservation trust 14 months ago. You're not listed as a beneficiary. Dolly dropped the sweater. That's impossible. That land has been in Mervin's family for generations. It's still in the family, technically, but it's held by the Pacific Northwest Conservation Trust. Your husband is listed as an unpaid environmental consultant, but he doesn't own it anymore. What about our cabin? A pause. That's even more complicated. Legal ownership transferred to your son Quincy through something called a qualified personal residence trust. Your husband retains usage rights for 15 years, but what? But you have no legal claim to it whatsoever. Dolly sat down hard on the bed. Quincy later told me her face went white as printer paper. The consulting business, she asked, her voice smaller now. Restructured as an LLC. Your husband is technically an employee now, not the owner. The operating agreements are complex. What does that mean for my settlement? Another pause, longer this time. Mrs. Harmon, based on what we can verify as actual marital assets, you're looking at maybe $40,000. Plus your car. The silence stretched so long that Patricia Franklin finally asked if Dolly was still there. 40,000, Dolly whispered. I'm sorry, Mrs. Harmon. I know this isn't what you were expecting. You might want to sit down with your attorney and discuss your options. After she hung up, Quincy said Dolly just sat there staring at the pile of clothes she'd been so confidently sorting. The woman who'd been planning her champagne lifestyle had just discovered she'd be lucky to afford boxed wine. The knock on my door came at 7:30 on a Thursday evening, just as I was settling down with a beer and the evening news. Through the peephole, I saw a man I didn't recognize, tall, lean, with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of hard living and harder lessons. Mr. Harmon, he said when I opened the door. My name is Clifford Barnes. I think we need to talk. Something about his stance, the way he held his shoulders, triggered recognition. Not of him specifically, but of something familiar in his features. The jawline, maybe. The set of his eyes. What can I do for you, Mr. Barnes? He pulled out a manila envelope. I got your address from one of those Ancestry DNA services. Turns out we're related. My blood turned cold. I'd submitted a DNA sample 6 months ago, part of a genealogy project Quincy had talked me into. What I hadn't expected was for it to uncover family secrets I didn't know existed. Related how? Clifford's smile was grim. According to the DNA results, you're my father. I stepped back, studying his face more carefully. Now that he'd said it, I could see it, the nose, definitely. The way he stood with his weight slightly forward, ready for anything. Come in, I said finally. This isn't a conversation for the front porch. In my living room, Clifford laid out the story. His mother was Rebecca Martinez, a woman I'd dated briefly in 1985 before meeting Dolly. We'd broken up when I got transferred to a logging operation in Alaska for 8 months. Apparently, Rebecca had been pregnant and chose not to tell me. She died 3 years ago, Clifford said. Cancer. Before she passed, she told me who my father was, but said she never wanted to complicate your life. Why now? I asked. Clifford pulled out his phone and showed me a screenshot of Dolly's Facebook post. Saw this online. Figured if you're going through a divorce, you might want to know you've got family you can count on. We talked for 2 hours. Clifford worked construction in Portland, had 2 kids of his own, and seemed like a decent man who'd inherited more than just my features. He had my practical nature and my distrust of drama. "I'm not here for money," he said as he prepared to leave. "Got my own life, my own business. But if you need anything at all, you call me." After he left, I sat in my recliner staring at the DNA report he'd left behind. Dolly didn't know about this, wouldn't find out unless I told her. But the timing was interesting. Just when she thought she understood exactly what my life contained, the universe decided to remind me that family comes in all shapes and sizes. Some of them even show up just when you need them most. The call came at 2 a.m. on a Saturday, jarring me out of deep sleep. Dolly's phone was buzzing on her nightstand, and since she'd moved into the guest room 2 weeks ago, I had to listen to it ring until she finally answered. "Wanda." Dolly's voice was groggy, confused. "What's wrong?" Even from down the hall, I could hear the hysteria in Wanda's voice, though I couldn't make out the words. Whatever she was saying made Dolly bolt upright. Slow down, Dolly said. "You're at the hospital?" "Which hospital?" More frantic talking from Wanda's end. "I'll be right there," Dolly said finally, and I heard her moving around, getting dressed in the dark. She left without saying a word to me, but I was already awake and thinking. Wanda Pratt was Dolly's younger sister, and she'd been cycling through addiction and mental health issues for the better part of 20 years. If she was in the hospital, it meant one of 2 things: another overdose or another suicide attempt. The next morning, I called Quincy. "Your Aunt Wanda's in the hospital again," I told him. "Your mother went to Portland last night." "What happened this time?" Quincy asked. "Don't know yet. But timing's interesting, don't you think?" Quincy was quiet for a moment. "You think it's related to the divorce? Your mother's been confiding in Wanda about her plans. If Wanda's been talking to the wrong people, or if she's feeling pressure." I didn't need to finish the thought. Quincy understood his aunt well enough to know that stress made her unpredictable, and unpredictable people said unpredictable things. 3 days later, Dolly came home looking like she'd aged a decade. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hair unwashed, and she moved like someone carrying a weight too heavy to bear. "How is she?" I asked, maintaining the pretense that I cared about anything other than what Wanda might have said to whom. "Detox," Dolly said flatly. "Again, she said some things while she was high. Things about our family, about the divorce." I waited. "She might have called your lawyer," Dolly admitted. "Might have said things she shouldn't have." Interesting. Wanda had always been loose with secrets when she was using, and if she'd called Vernon's office claiming to have information about our marriage. "What kind of things?" I asked. Dolly's shoulders sagged. "Things that aren't true. Things that could hurt both of us if they get out." But I was already thinking about the implications. If Wanda had made contact with my legal team, Vernon would have recorded every word. And if those words contradicted Dolly's official statements about our marriage, well, that was just one more nail in the coffin she was building for herself. The Jackson County Courthouse felt like a coliseum the morning of our mediation hearing. Dolly arrived in a black power suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, flanked by Leland Moss, her attorney who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. I came with Vernon in a single manila folder. The mediator, Judge Patricia Stone, was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who'd seen enough divorce drama to fill several lifetimes. She opened the session by reviewing Dolly's initial demands: 60% of all marital assets, alimony, and exclusive ownership of what she termed the family properties. "Mr. Moss," Judge Stone said, "please present your client's asset inventory." Leland fumbled through his paperwork, clearly uncomfortable. "Your Honor, we've encountered some complications in our asset assessment." Vernon leaned forward. "If I may, Your Honor, we'd like to address those complications directly." He slid a thick binder across the table. Judge Stone flipped through the first few pages, her eyebrows rising steadily. "Mr. Moss," she said slowly, "were you aware that the timber property your client claims was transferred to a conservation trust 14 months before any divorce proceedings began?" Dolly's face went white. "That's impossible. That land has been in Mervin's family for generations." "It's still in the family, Mrs. Harmon," Vernon replied calmly. "Just not your family. Legal ownership transferred to your son through a qualified trust arrangement." Judge Stone continued reading. "And this consulting business, restructured as an LLC with complex ownership agreements, Mr. Harmon is technically an employee now. What about the cabin on Mackenzie River? Leland asked desperately. Vernon smiled. Also gifted to their son. Mr. Harmon retains usage rights, but Mrs. Harmon has no legal claim whatsoever. The silence in that room was deafening. I watched Dolly's confident expression crumble as the reality hit her. Everything she planned to take, everything she'd been bragging about to her friends, had been legally moved beyond her reach months before she'd even filed papers. But Vernon wasn't finished. Your Honor, there's one more matter. We have evidence that Mrs. Harmon's sister, Wanda Pratt, contacted our office while under the influence of controlled substances. She provided information suggesting that Mrs. Harmon may have misrepresented certain facts about the marriage. He played a recording of Wanda's rambling phone call, where she admitted that Dolly had been planning the divorce for over 2 years and had been deliberately trying to provoke arguments to document abuse that never happened. Judge Stone looked at Dolly with evident disgust. Mrs. Harmon, do you have anything to say about these revelations? Dolly just sat there, staring at the table like it might swallow her whole. Based on the evidence presented, Judge Stone continued, I'm ruling that the assets in question were legally transferred prior to any divorce proceedings. Mrs. Harmon's settlement will be limited to her personal vehicle and any funds and accounts bearing solely her name. As we walked out of the courthouse, Vernon clapped me on the shoulder. How does it feel to be a free man, Merv? Feels like justice, I replied, watching Dolly and her lawyer arguing in the parking lot. Feels like finally playing chess instead of checkers. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I stood on the deck of my cabin. Legally Quincy's cabin now, but still my home, watching the Mackenzie River flow past like it had for the past century. The morning was crisp, autumn air carrying the scent of pine and possibility. Clifford had driven down from Portland for the weekend, bringing his 2 kids to meet their newly discovered grandfather. We'd been building a relationship slowly, carefully, both of us learning that blood doesn't automatically create bonds, but respect and honesty do. Dad, Clifford said, joining me at the railing with a cup of coffee. Still feels weird calling you that. Feels weird hearing it, I admitted. Good weird, though. His son Tyler, 16 and already showing signs of the family mechanical aptitude, was down by the water teaching his younger sister how to skip stones. Quincy was with them, playing the role of older cousin with natural ease. Whatever happened to Dolly? Clifford asked. I took a sip of my coffee, considering. Last I heard, she moved to a rental in town. Brock, the trainer, disappeared about 2 weeks after the settlement became public. Funny how financial circumstances can change a man's romantic interests. The cryptocurrency portfolio I'd built through my Swiss accounts had performed better than anyone expected. Bitcoin's value had nearly doubled in the 6 months since the divorce, making my decision to convert traditional assets look prescient rather than paranoid. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was watching my family, both the old and the newly discovered parts, gather around my table without the toxic presence of someone who'd viewed us all as assets to be liquidated. Grandpa Merv. Tyler called from the riverbank. Come show us how to build a proper campfire. I smiled, remembering my own grandfather teaching me the same skills on this same stretch of river 60 years ago. Some traditions were worth preserving, worth protecting from people who saw heritage as just another commodity to be divided and sold. Vernon had called earlier that week with an update. Dolly's sister Wanda was back in rehab, this time court-ordered after her hospital confession had triggered a welfare investigation. Her lawyer, Leland Moss, had apparently learned a valuable lesson about proper due diligence in asset discovery. And me? I was learning that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's building something better from the ashes of what someone else tried to destroy. As the sun set over the Cascade Mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, I realized that this was what victory actually looked like. Not courtroom drama or financial devastation, but family gathered around a fire, stories being shared, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that what really mattered had survived intact. Dolly had thought she was destroying my life. Instead, she'd freed me to discover what life could actually be when you stop trying to make the wrong person happy. That night, as 3 generations of men shared stories and laughter under a canopy of stars, I understood that some battles are worth fighting not for what you might gain, but for what you refuse to lose.